everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. I am going to be reviewing all of the books I've read in October. I actually read quite a few books in October and I have a lot of thoughts. So starting off strong, we have the Hunger Games prequel, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which I'm not sure I actually technically read in October. Can't quite remember, but I'm just going to count it anyway because it's quite timely. So this one was a chunky book. This did take me quite a while to read, and it did also take me a little bit to get into, but once I was into it, I could not put it down. It is so good. So I'm sure everybody's heard about this book, read this book, or seen the movie by now, but if you haven't, this is in the perspective of Coriolanus Snow. I really love the book from his perspective. I think Suzanne took on a real challenge writing from his perspective, but I think it definitely paid off, and this is the best book in the whole series. Coriolanus Snow is an asshole, but this book made me like him. It made me root for him all the way up to the end. She's done such a good job at writing for him in the inner monologue and somehow making all of the bad things he did seem kind of reasonable. I also really loved the introduction of the new characters to the series, Lucy Gray. She is a great character. She's one of the best in the whole series, and she's so memorable. What's crazy about this book is that it feels so necessary and important to the original Hunger Games series that I can't believe that Suzanne Collins didn't have this storyline in mind when she was writing the Hunger Games. Also, of course, there's lots of little Easter eggs in here that go back to the original series, but not too many, so it doesn't feel cheesy at all. I think my favourite part of this book was definitely that climactic scene near the end between Coriolanus and Lucy Gray. Neither of the characters actually talked that much in the scene, yet so much was being said. The scene just really shows Coriolanus' character best. When Lucy Gray goes out of the cabin to go find Katniss, we don't know whether it's because she's realised who Coriolanus really is and realises she can't trust him so has to leave, or whether she's genuinely just going out to look for Katniss. But Coriolanus doesn't need to know the truth. All he needs to know is that she is a threat and that she needs to be eliminated. One of the things I found really interesting in this book is the obvious metaphor with the songbirds and snakes. Obviously, Lucy Gray is the songbird and Coriolanus is the snake. But throughout the book, you notice that Lucy Gray actually uses snakes a lot as a weapon, and in turn, Coriolanus uses songbirds as a weapon. This shows that both characters were taking advantage of one another and other people in order to survive or achieve their goal, and it's not just Coriolanus. Of course, as this movie has just come out, I went and saw it recently, and it was so good. I genuinely think it's one of the best movie adaptations I've ever seen. They kept everything that was necessary, got rid of a few things, added a few things, but other than that, it was perfect. So for this book, I am going to be giving it an 8 out of 10. I think it's the best one in the series. If you haven't read it somehow, go read it. So the next book that I read was The Shining by Stephen King. I've read a few of Stephen King's books before, and I really like his writing style and his storytelling. And I couldn't believe I hadn't read The Shining yet. I thought it was just one of those books that everyone should read, so I had to give it a go. This was great. Before reading this, I had seen the movie, as I think everyone has, and oh my god, the movie does not do it justice in the slightest. After watching the movie again after reading this, the movie is actually awful, really bad. And I think it's time that the movie gets remade. This is another book where the main character is essentially a bad guy, and it's really interesting to read from their perspectives, although Stephen King didn't do as good a job as making me like the main character, but I don't think that was his intention. What I really like about Stephen King books is that he gets this insane image in his head, which I'm not even sure how he comes up with, and he does such a good job of putting it into words so that we, as the reader, can see exactly what he was envisioning, and it's really good. There's really not too much to be said about this book. It's quite old. I'm sure a lot of you guys have read it. If you haven't, I would definitely recommend reading it if you're into this sort of scary thriller genre. For my rating, I'm going to give this book an 8 out of 10 as well. When I was looking for my next book to read, I was looking for something a little bit lighter, just a bit of a contrast from those past two books, and I ended up picking up Madison Beer's The Half of It. Now, I am a huge Madison Beer fan. She's gorgeous and I love her music, so I was like, okay, we'll give this a go. This is a very small book. I did read this in one day. I am imagining that when she's like 50 years old and she's super big and she's put out so many more albums, she's going to release a book called All of It, and it's going to be like twice the size. That'd be nice. Going into this, and after reading the blurb, I was pretty hopeful. I was sort of envisioning, obviously this is a autobiography, but I thought the sort of messaging behind it was just to always treat people with kindness, because you never know what they're going through. And so I thought, even though this is a book about her, it would still be applicable to anybody. And I think that was her goal as well. After reading it, however, I'm not too sure that she did achieve that goal. I think she dove quite deeply into some of the events in her life and how she felt, but in terms of the messaging, it kind of skimmed lightly over that topic. I just don't think it went deep enough into it for this book to apply or matter to everyone. In terms of how it was written, it was fine. It was a very, very easy read. I do feel like it could have been written a bit better. In saying that, I do feel like I know Madison Beer a bit better now as a person. I think one of the reasons she may have written this book is, and you notice in her interviews a lot, she is deeply affected by haters and people having negative things to say about her, and she likes to set the record straight. She likes to try clear up those opinions about her, which I think, like, I probably would too. I think most of us would too. Unfortunately though, if this book is sort of a response to the haters, it's not going to achieve anything. Her haters aren't going to read this, only her fans will, and her fans already respect her enough to not believe what other people say about her online. So unfortunately, I do love Madison Beer still, and I do feel like I know her a bit better, but this book I'm going to have to rate a 3 out of 10. If you're a fan of hers and you want to know a little bit more about her, yeah, give it a read. Otherwise, you can probably pass this one. So the next book that I read, I don't actually have on me because I've loaned it out to my mum, but it is Room. I'd actually watched the movie for this a couple years ago, and the movie is really fantastic. I wasn't really aware there was a book until I was in a secondhand store and came across it. I'm like, oh, I've got to give this a read. I didn't really know what to expect, but when I opened the first page, I kind of rolled my eyes, and I did not have high hopes. The book is in the perspective of a 5-year-old boy who has grown up in captivity within a room. As reading this book is like speaking to a 5-year-old who can't speak properly. I kind of imagined that the rest of the book was going to be a really hard read, but once you got past those first few pages and you got used to the way it was written, it's really fantastic. I haven't really seen or read anything like this story before. It's such an interesting perspective and an interesting storyline, and just so good. The author took on such a bold task of writing a story about what a child grow up to be like if they've only ever lived and been confined to one room, because you really have to use your imagination. And what she went with and what this child was like, I think would probably be very accurate to if someone was in that same situation. Despite the heavy matter of the book and the kind of awkward perspective you have, this book was so enjoyable. I don't know what it was. This is definitely the best book I've ever read so far. And the movie's really great as well, which is rare. So if you haven't read this book, I really recommend doing so. If you don't really feel like reading it, at least watch the movie. It's such a good story. This book is definitely a 10 out of 10. So the next book I decided to read, I found in a secondhand store as well. It is The Girl on the Train. I heard really good reviews about this, and I was reading the reviews that are like within this book. Because of those, I had such high expectations going into this. Unfortunately, my expectations were let down just a little bit. I don't know what it was, but I found this book so boring. I just feel like the subject matter just needed like a little bit more substance. I feel like there weren't enough events in this book, that it was kind of dull. Now, the narrator of this book is the girl on the train who sees the main events of the story happen, and so we're getting everything from a third person perspective, which I'm not against that perspective. I think it's really interesting. It's been done like quite a few times, but not too much. But because of this perspective, it's made me hate the main character. Now, I don't necessarily think the main character was supposed to be likable, which is fine because I've read these other stories where the main character is not supposed to be likable. But this character was so unlikable, the book was hard to read. Rachel is pathetic and is someone who feels sorry for herself. She likes to inject herself into situations that have nothing to do with her. I hated this character so much that it's made me hate the book. In terms of the writing style, that's not that bad. The way the story is being told is not bad at all. It's just sort of the story itself and the main character, which has made me dislike this book so much. I did watch the movie after I read the book, and the movie is kind of awful. I'm not sure if it's because I hated the book so much I was always gonna hate the movie, or if the movie is just bad. But this whole universe, I'm done with. I don't want any part in this universe anymore. I'm done with it. It's in the past. Goodbye, Rachel. Goodbye, girl on the train. Because of the way it was written and parts of the story, I'm gonna give this a 5 out of 10. But overall, I did not like this. Now, that was all the books I'd read in October, but I've decided I'm gonna do one bonus book review just because it's very timely, and I also really want to encourage people to read this. That is Matthew Perry's memoir, Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing. So I actually read this one at the start of the year, and I loved it so much. So before reading this, I was a huge Friends fan. I'm constantly watching Friends. I always have it on in the background. I've just watched it countless times. But I imagine I've watched the show all the way through, somewhere in the 50s. Like, I just love Friends. But I was the biggest Chandler fan. And now after reading this book, I'm a huge Matthew Perry fan. So this is a really well written memoir. He is such a good writer. The way he told the stories was fantastic. This book goes really in depth into all the significant moments of his life. You learn so much about him by reading this. You learn a lot about when he was on the set of Friends. You learn a bit about his relationships. The main theme in this book is obviously his disease, his addiction, and he talked about these topics really well. Reading this book as a fan was really fantastic. I also think that if you were reading this as someone who has gone through similar issues to him, this book would be really helpful for you as well. When I read this book back at the start of the year, it was so amazing. I don't think I could read it again, but I would imagine if you were to read it now, it would sort of read like a eulogy at his own funeral. He did talk about in this book a lot about, him dying and the way he wants to be remembered. He didn't just want to be remembered for his work on Friends. And if you read this book, there'll be so many more things to remember him by. This book is so well written, and it makes me so sad that he'll never get to write again. I'm not going to be rating this book. It doesn't need to be rated. It just needs to be read. Please pick this book up. Please read it. It's what he would have wanted. So that was all the books that I read in October, plus one bonus book. I'm midway through November now, and I can guarantee you that the next book review you see will not include as many books. I was just on such a reading kick in October. I don't know what it was. If any of you guys have read any of those books, I would love to hear your thoughts on them too down below. And if you have any book recommendations, put those down below too. I would love to hear your guys' suggestions, and I'm always looking for more books to read. Thank you so much for watching.